Minute, Jim. Joe from Arkansas. Come on board here and let's see what have you got to talk about on this trust situation.
Trump, I thought y'all was talking about common law.
Say again?
I thought y'all was talking about common law.
Common law trust, that's correct. Right now, you want to, if you've got a question about something else, go ahead. We'll deal with that. We can break off from this.
It pertains to common law. I don't want to change the topic, but here in Arkansas lately, we got a problem with illegal immigrants here.
Yes.
We ain't called any names out, just the initial messaging. But our jails are crowded, right?
I beg your pardon?
Our jail is crowded. Make a long story short, it was only meant to hold 1,000 people, but it got space for 800 and something. So here's the bottom line, right? The jail is locking up people that, do things like violent offenders and stuff like that. But at the same time, they're locking up non-violent offenders, people that got misdemeanors only.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, that is to me, that's a violation of the law because, see, these are people that should be out working or cutting grass and stuff, but yet they want to lock them up. Like mouthing up at the cop or, maybe just...
Now, hang on a minute, Joe. You mentioned in the beginning there you were talking about illegal aliens.
Right.
Now, are you talking about illegal aliens right now?
Well, see, what I'm saying, right?
Well, wait a minute. Who are you talking about? I need to understand who you're talking about being locked up.
Okay, all right. What I meant to say is Arkansas, right? Citizens.
Yeah, okay. People, yeah. You're not talking about illegal aliens.
Well,
okay, go ahead. Go ahead. That's fine. I just want to know what you're talking about. Go ahead.
Okay, here's what I'm trying to say, right? A long story short. I think the Supreme Court said that the police did not serve warrants on misdemeanors, right? So that throws the whole legal system in this state to a blind, Police officers cannot serve warrants on anything until it went up all the way to the state Supreme Court, and they cleared the okay so they can serve warrants on misdemeanors. Now, according to the United States Constitution, right, it says all suits in value what the man want to help out on this, but it says excess of $20 or more.
Yeah, but Joe, what you're talking about there is talking about a civil case, not a criminal case.
Well,
the suits of common law, see, that's talking about a civil lawsuit that has nothing to do with a criminal prosecution.
Well, look, what I'm trying to say is this, right? Misdemeanor can be tried in the court under common law, right?
I doubt it. I doubt if they're using the common law on misdemeanors in Arkansas. They're bringing you into their regular equity court.
Yeah, but see, for a while they were confused about can you serve a warrant on a misdemeanor. Now they say it's okay. So what
Joe, what you need to understand is that you're talking about 14th Amendment citizens. The citizens of Arkansas are 14th Amendment citizens of the United States. So you need to go to the 14th Amendment in order to find out what the rules are regarding how these people accused of these misdemeanors can be treated. Now, under the 14th Amendment, they can be treated any way the government wants to treat them. 14th Amendment citizens of the United States don't have any constitutional rights. They only have 14th Amendment privileges, no rights whatsoever. Hang on, Joe. We'll be back in 3 minutes, and we'll continue talking about this. Hi, listeners. You're back on the air with the Ericwhoru Promote Ron Paul for President show, and right now we're talking to Joe in Arkansas, and Joe has some questions about people being locked up for misdemeanor charges, served warrants, apparently contrary to Arkansas law, but they've changed the law back and forth 2 or 3 times. Nobody knows what the law is. And besides that, it doesn't make any difference what the law is. The government can do anything that it pleases with citizens of the United States. And, Joe, that's the real problem problem that we have here is getting the people, we talk the word people, I'm using it in the common ordinary term, but getting the citizens of the United States to understand that they don't have any constitutional right and that they need to stop claiming to be citizens of the United States and they need to claim to be people of the United States, and they're not the same. The people of the United States and citizens of the United States are not interchangeable terms. Joe, go to the preamble of the Constitution and read the preamble. And you'll see in the preamble it starts off, "We the people of the United States." And it's to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Now, and then go to the First Amendment, and it says, Congress shall make no law regarding the people's right to redress of grievance. Then go to the Second Amendment, and it says, the people's right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Then go to the Fourth Amendment, it says the people's right to not be searched without a warrant. And go to the Ninth and Tenth Amendment, and it says everything not relegated to the states or reserved to the people. No place do you find the word citizen anywhere in those places where I've mentioned it. The only place you find citizens mentioned is in the first article of the Constitution, where it explains what a citizen must do in order to run for office. A citizen of the United States is someone who volunteers to be a citizen. I know that you were taught in school, as I was, and most everybody in this country was taught in the government information centers when we were small children, that when you're born here on this land, that you're automatically a citizen by birth, but that simply isn't true, Joe. It's impossible for a real live flesh and blood human being, man or woman, boy or girl, to be born into an artificial entity. The government of the United States is an artificial entity. It does not exist in nature. It's created by men. If a pregnant woman was in a Boy Scout camp and happened to give birth to her baby in the Boy Scout camp, would the baby automatically then be a Boy Scout? What if the baby was a girl? So, Joe, with having heard me explain those things, does that change your questions any?
Well, I had a misdemeanor case a while back. I was arrested for trespassing and obstruction and unauthorized use of computer equipment. Now, I was facing 6 months in jail, and I spent 2 months in jail. When the time came to go to trial, I told my, I told my public pretender that tell the prosecutor I want a jury trial. And she said, "What? You can't do that. There's no such thing as a jury trial for a misdemeanor." I said, "That ain't what the United States Constitution. There's something the member said." I said, "Go there and tell him I want a jury trial."
Well, she was a little bit confused there because there certainly is a jury trial if they are able to put you in jail. Then there's a jury trial.
Trust me. For 2 months they had in jail. But so she came back and he said, "No deal." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what." I said, "You go there and tell them again that ain't what the Constitution says, and I want a jury trial, and if I don't get a jury trial, I'm gonna go ahead and scream anyway." So, and he went back over to him again. Make a long story short, and said, "Okay, $6 fine and 2 weeks community service." I said, "That." Now look at 6 months.
Well, they scare you with those long sentences in order to get you to plea bargain. But I wouldn't have done any of that. I wouldn't have had a public defender. I would have taken a position that I would have raised the issue of political jurisdiction, because I don't want to have any conversation with those people because they don't understand what freedom is. They think that they're my boss, and they think that I'm their slave. They don't realize that we ended slavery at the end of the Civil War. Now they want to make everybody a slave, black and white all together, and that's what they're doing in these courts, and that's what citizen of the United States is. Citizen of the United States is nothing but a voluntary servant. The difference between a slave and a voluntary servant is that a slave has to be taken care of by his master. The master has to feed him, clothe him, provide him a place to live. If he gets sick, he has to doctor him. A slave doesn't have to provide anything for himself. But a voluntary servant is much easier on the slave master, because a voluntary servant, such as they've tried to make everybody in this country, and they've done a fairly good job, a voluntary servant has to provide his own place to live, his own food, his own clothes, and all of his necessities. While at the same time, the state, the slave master, gets to take whatever they want from you through taxation and other kinds of regulation. So by freeing the slaves, they have brought everybody, almost everybody in the country, into a condition of voluntary servitude, where now the slave master is the state, and the slave master doesn't have to provide for any of its slaves, because that's actually what we have here in this country, is the slavery by a different name, where all the slaves have to provide for all their own care, while the slave master reaps all the profit. That's what we have here, Joe. And that's what we deal with here on this show, is to try to teach people, like Ron Paul is advocating, that we want everybody to become free again, so that we don't have any of this stuff. Prior to the Civil War, the term citizen of the United States wasn't hardly ever mentioned. Everybody referred to themselves as the people of the United States. It was after the Civil War and the 13th and 14th Amendment were brought in that the term citizen of the United States became very, very popular. So they lied to everybody at the time of the Civil War, claiming that the purpose of the 13th and 14th Amendment was to provide citizenship status for the recently freed slaves. But there's nothing in either one of those amendments that says anything at all about that. And if you just read the amendments for the words that are there, without, if you read everything that's there, the words that are there, and exclude everything from your mind that you were taught in school, because they lied to you in school, telling you what the intent was of those amendments. But if you read those amendments, the intent that they told you in school isn't in either one of them. At the time those amendments were being advertised to the people in the country to be adopted, the Congress people who wrote those amendments lied to everybody and told everybody that the purpose of those amendments was to provide a citizenship status for the freed slaves. Well, if that was the purpose of it, and if the men who wrote those amendments could explain it to the people at that time with their speeches and in their newspaper articles, then how come they couldn't write any of it into the amendments themselves? Because there's nothing in the amendment that says anything about it. The amendments apply to all people of every color, doesn't make any difference, and when you voluntarily claim to be a citizen, you put yourself under the jurisdiction of all of the problems that you explained a moment ago that you incurred dealing with the court, being accused of the crimes that they accused you of, and having to deal with a public defender and negotiate with the prosecutor. The people of the United States don't have to put up with any of that, because we, the people of the United States, Joe, are not subject to the jurisdiction of those courts. Hang on, Joe. After this 3-minute break, and we'll talk some more about this.
All right.
Hi, listeners. We're back on the air with Ericwhoru, Promote Ron Paul for President show, and right now we're talking to Joe from Arkansas about the political status. So, Joe, do you digest what I said before the break?
Well, you have to kind of forgive me, it's kind of noisy where I'm at. But I'm glad you cleared that up about we the people rather than citizens.
That's correct. It's important for you to, Joe, go back and read that preamble so you understand the difference between people and citizen. And are you a black man, Joe?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Understand that there's a little bit of difference. You read the preamble, but you have a different political status. Actually, it's even higher, because your ancestors were kidnapped in Africa, brought here in chains against their will, sold into slavery, kept there for generations, with their families disrupted, children, wives, and all that, at the whim of their master. Then, after the Civil War, your ancestors were given their freedom with no condition. Understand the difference here. Your people, your ancestors, were kidnapped and brought to this country against their will. The white people that are here came here of their own free will voluntarily. They came here, on a passport or a visa, and then after they were here for a while, they decided that they wanted to be a citizen, and so they applied for citizenship, and then they had to study the Constitution, and then take a test on the Constitution, and then go to court and renounce their former sovereign in, Europe, England, France, or Germany, or wherever they came from, and then they swore in allegiance to the government of the United States. Your ancestors didn't do any of that. They were kidnapped against their will, came here in chains, brought here in chains, and then given their freedom. Your ancestors never renounced their African sovereign. They never swore in allegiance to the United States and have absolutely no obligation to obey the rules of this country whatsoever, the political rules. You do have an obligation to obey common law rules like, murder, rape, robbery, and trespass. But when you understand your political heritage as the posterity of free slaves, you actually have a higher political status than the white people here. You have no obligation to this government whatsoever. Fortunately for the white people in this country, the black people don't understand what I just told you. And the white people in this country don't like me telling you it either. But that's the way it is, and that's the truth of the matter, and you can figure out everything that I said if you would stop and think about it. And now that I've told it to you, you know that it's true. Everything I told you is absolutely irrefutable fact. It's not my opinion, it's fact. And there's no way when you understand what I just told you, that the police and the courts that are mistreating you down there can get away with it when you understand your political status. So what do you think of that, Joe?
Something, I apologize for the noise. I'm in a very noisy area. You just stuck me upside the head, and I never even knew all this.
No, very few people did, and it's amazing. You just keep coming back because, listen, you have to hear it again and again and again, and then you have to hear it.
One thing I want to put in here before we get off of it, Joe, you can come on to, we know that you get it down, and you can play it for your black friends down there, and you can teach these people how they can exercise their personal individual sovereignty as sovereign black people. And I encourage you to do it. The only thing that you need to do is remember, when you're sovereign, you have a duty to recognize the other sovereign. The government of the United States is sovereign, and the government of the United States has a lot of physical power that you don't have. So you speak respectfully, as you have been here, of course, and you talk to them as equals because you are politically equal, and you're equal in every other way too. But here we're primarily interested in political equality because everything that goes on in this country is based on your political status. And you people need to understand what your political status is.
All right.
You have a very high political status.
Hey, Joe, another tip. I'll give you a tip before we get off the call, and that is, you get over to GoDaddy and buy blacksovereigns.com, you're liable to have a hit on your hands.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Well, but it may be taken by the time you get there, because I think that's a very good idea, don't you, Eric?
I do, yes.
Blacksovereigns.com.
Yeah. Well, I want to say one thing, gentlemen. I'm a homeless guy, and I don't have a house, but I fight these people here in this state and in this city, of Little Rock, Arkansas, because I got some articles that I wrote about, these illegal aliens here, and all I've been doing is fighting the city hall and everything, and all these illegals are causing the homelessness, And because there's a lot of homeless people here, we sometimes sleep in places where we ain't supposed to sleep at. And they say, the police will put more pressure on us than they are about trying to get people legal out of here. And we always catch obstruction charges or mouthing off at the cop, and all those are misdemeanor deals. But yet, more homeless people in jail because of all these problems caused by these illegals. And I just want to say that if I was you, and I was homeless, and I was sleeping around in corners wherever I could find a place, and the police come along and hassle me, I would say, look, if you honky ancestors had not kidnapped my ancestors in Africa, I wouldn't be sleeping in this doorway. So leave me alone. A lot of that's going on. A lot of my people are being served with misdemeanors.
Well, they need to understand, Joe, that as the posterity of the freed slaves who never swore an allegiance to the government of the United States, and that includes Arkansas, has no political authority whatsoever to enforce any of those statutes on them. The only laws that you are subject to is the common law: murder, rape, robbery, and trespass. That's the only thing they can get you for. They can't get you for all this stuff that you're talking about. Those are statutory crimes that are made up for those who have voluntarily claimed to be a citizen. If they ask you if you're a citizen of the United States, if I was you, I would respond, I'm of the posterity of freed slaves. My ancestors were brought here in chains against their will, and then after the Civil War, we were given our freedom, and we didn't swear any allegiance to the United States or to the state of Arkansas. We were born here free and sovereign on this land. You have an obligation under the 13th Amendment to leave us alone. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. Right now we're talking about involuntary servitude. You cannot force me into a condition of servitude against my will. It's impossible for anybody to be born a citizen of the United States. Everyone is born a sovereign individual, man or woman, boy or girl. It doesn't make a difference what color you are. It's impossible for anybody to have ever been born in the United States. And remember this one. If a pregnant woman was present in a Boy Scout camp and gave birth to her baby in the Boy Scout camp, would the baby automatically then be a Boy Scout? What if the baby was a girl? That makes the point. What if the baby was a girl? Obviously, a girl can't be a Boy Scout, and neither can a baby boy born in a Boy Scout camp automatically be a Boy Scout. And it's the same thing with the United States. There's no difference between the Boy Scouts and the United States. They are both artificial entities created by the intellect of men. They don't, either one, exist in nature, and nobody can be born into an artificial entity. Nobody can be born a citizen of the United States. Read the first opening clause of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States. That is an impossibility. That wording there is nothing but smoke and mirrors to suck people into believing something that is absolutely physically impossible to happen. Hang on, Joe. We'll be back in 3 minutes after this break. About political status. Joe, as a homeless man, I presume that you don't have computer access?
I go to the library.
Okay, that's good. Good. You go to the library and you use a computer there. You can go onto my website, Ericwhoru.com, ERICWHORU.com, and I have essays there. You can link over to my Yahoo group at Ericwhoru, WHORU, Yahoo Guru group, and I have a lot of essays posted there on political status. Now, I do all that stuff primarily for white people, of course, But everything there applies, and the reason I mention that is because the only thing that doesn't apply to black people is the claim of political heritage based on the preamble or July 4th, 1776. Because you guys can't claim that. It'd be totally inappropriate because you were brought here in chains. You had nothing to do with the revolution. You had nothing to do with the writing of the Constitution. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a very high position. Your position, in my opinion, your political status is higher than a white person because, as I explained earlier, white people voluntarily came to this continent. You didn't. So somebody who voluntarily comes here, it can be argued reasonably that they would have a considerable obligation to follow all the rules of the people who were here before. But your ancestors were brought here against their will. So how could you possibly be charged with having any obligation to obey the rules of the white people? But that doesn't excuse you though for common law, like murder, rape, robbery, or trespass. But they can't get you for any of their man-made laws, their statutes. When you understand how to assert it, you got to know how to say it to them. You got to say it in the right way so that you don't trip yourself up. It's not all that complicated, but it has to be done right. It was me, and I was a black man, and I was arrested by those cops and brought before a judge. I say, just a minute, Judge, before we go any further. We have an issue of political jurisdiction to resolve. And he would say, what do you mean by that? I would say, my ancestors were kidnapped in Africa, and they were brought here against their will. And after the Civil War, they were set free, and they didn't renounce their former sovereign, and they didn't take any oath of allegiance to the United States. Where did I ever volunteer to participate in your political fiction, your artificial political entity? Don't say fiction. I used to say that all the time, but I discovered or determined that the word fiction is the wrong word. The correct word is artificial. And everybody that's done that, and I don't have any black people who have done that, but I have a lot of white people who have done it. They don't say anything, of course, about being the posterity of freed slaves. We use the argument going back to July 4th, 1776, or to the preamble to the Constitution. But yours is just as valid. In fact, yours is more valid because your ancestors did not come here voluntarily. And so how could you possibly be in any way held to obey the rules of the artificial political entity? They better treat you guys nice. It's fortunate for the white people that the black people don't understand what I'm talking about, because if they did, the black people could vote all the white people out of the state and take over the state.
Well, it's not a race thing to me, but it is a race thing when these white people are hiring Mexicans here.
Well, I understand that, and I'm not mentioning it anyway as a race thing either. I'm mentioning it as using what you have to use, because you see, you can't use the July 4th argument, and you can't use the people of the preamble argument because your people have nothing to do with that. So the appropriate argument you use is the slavery argument. It has nothing to do with race. It doesn't make a difference what color you are. What's important is how the political thing. What was your political status? What was your ancestors' political status when they were slaves? They didn't have any. They were treated like property. Well, that was finally recognized as being wrong, and your people were then freed after the Civil War. And so that's it has nothing to do with race or anything else. It has to do with what was your political status. It's not a race card. It's a political status card. This is how your political status was determined. Your political status is determined because of what happened regarding your ancestors' condition of slavery. So you just use it. It has nothing to do with it. It's not a racial thing. It doesn't make a difference the fact that you're black. That has nothing to do with it. It's the way that your people were treated. Your people may have been treated that way because they were black, but that's beside the point at this time. The only thing that's important now is the political implication. And politically, your ancestors, when they were freed, did not renounce their sovereign in Africa, and they did not swear an allegiance to the United States. They didn't apply for citizenship. So you can't, and besides that, and even if they had, it wouldn't be binding on you because you weren't alive then. Nothing can, think of this one. How can it possibly be reasonable that those who were born before can make rules that would be binding on those who were born later? I wasn't even born when they made all these rules, and so how can they possibly be binding on me? I didn't have any choice or any say about what these rules are or whether these rules were going to be put into effect, and I am going to be held responsible to obey these rules. Who said so? Who gets to decide that because they were born before me, that they get to make rules that I have to obey? That's a bunch of baloney. There's no logic to that in any way. No matter what color you are. It has nothing to do with color. It has to do with, does it make any sense that those who were born before I was ever born could make rules that could be binding on me, and then I'm born later, and I've got to follow their rules? They better be very, very nice to me, and they better have reasonable rules that make sense to me if they want me to follow them. And the way they're treating you people down there is not reasonable. And when they treat people in an unreasonable way, then people who are treated unreasonably start thinking about it and start doing a little bit of research, and they discover the things that I have been telling you. And so when you learn these things, see, they can't argue against it. Isn't it true that your ancestors were kidnapped in Africa? Isn't it true that they were brought here against their will and chains? Isn't it true that they were held in slavery for many, many generations? And isn't it true that after the Civil War they were given their freedom? And isn't it true that they never renounced their foreign sovereign in Africa? And isn't it true that they never swore allegiance to the United States government? Those things are all absolutely true. Nobody can argue against it. It's a catch-22 for them. There's no way that they can claim they have any jurisdiction over it. Isn't it true that the 13th Amendment prohibits involuntary servitude? Go read the words. It's very, very simple. Involuntary servitude shall not exist in the United States. That includes me. In order for me to have been, to be in a condition of servitude to the government, I would have to have volunteered. When did I volunteer? Where's their proof that I volunteered? They have to produce the proof. I don't have to prove this important point here. I don't have to prove that I did not volunteer. They have to prove that I did. They don't get to ask me any question. They've got to produce the proof out of their file. And it's simply impossible. There's no way they can do it. They don't have it. They can't produce it. So when you understand all that stuff, Joe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is just information overload.
Well, that's why I said, come back here on We the People Radio Network and go on the archive, and you can download this, and you can, put it on a CD, and you can play it, and you can play it for your friends, and you can all learn this stuff. And you can, you or your friends can come back on here on this show anytime. Between midnight and 2 a.m. and you can ask me about it, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it.
Well, I found this site by accident, so I was looking for Mark Funky.
Just understand one thing: this is the Ericwhoru promotes Ron Paul for President show, and I expect all you people to vote for Ron Paul.
I want to say something about Ron Paul.
Go ahead.
Adrienne Curry, she's an actress and a model on a show called the Adrienne Curry Show, which is broadcast on a website called downlive.com. Somebody asked her, would she vote for Ron Paul? She said she would rather vote for Obama rather than vote for Ron Paul.
That's because they don't understand the difference between the two and what a great man Ron Paul is and how important freedom and liberty is. Hang on, Joe. We got a 1 minute break here. We'll be back in 1 minute. This is a short break. Joe from Arkansas about political status and how it affects, black people and white people and all of us, and vote for Ron Paul because Ron Paul is for freedom for everybody, individual rights for everybody, no matter what color they are. So let's all get together and promote Ron Paul for president. But if Joe has any other questions, be welcome to call back anytime, Joe. But let's now, Jim, go back and pick up where we were.